Release my father right now, and then I'll tell you who he saved that night.
The words exploded from the mouth of 10-year-old Emily Turner as she stood right in front of Judge Jonathan Hayes' bench, her little hands gripping the edge of the polished wood, her teddy bear pressed against her chest. She had burst through the courtroom doors, running down the center aisle, past rows of shocked spectators, past the defense table where her father sat in handcuffs, past the smirking prosecutor Rachel Whit, until she reached the judge's elevated platform and screamed those words with every ounce of courage her trembling body could summon. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Lawyers jumped from their seats. The bailiff rushed forward to grab her. Journalists scrambled to capture the moment on their phones. And prosecutor Rachel Whitmore threw her hands up in exaggerated disbelief, laughing mockingly as if this were nothing more than a child's tantrum disrupting serious adult business. But Judge Jonathan Hayes raised his hand, stopping the bailiff mid-step, his piercing eyes locked onto Emily's tear-streaked face. Michael Turner, her father, sat frozen in the defendant's chair, his heart shattering as he watched his little girl risk everything to save him from a system that had already decided he was guilty. This wasn't just another trial. This was a spectacle, orchestrated by ambition, a carefully constructed lie designed to feed the political hunger of prosecutor Rachel Whit, who saw Michael Turner as nothing more than a convenient villain in her rise to power. She had painted him as a monster, a reckless truck driver who murdered a wealthy Dallas businessman named Gregory Whitman in a fit of road rage and fled the scene like a coward, leaving death and destruction behind him. The media devoured the narrative with ravenous appetite, broadcasting his mugshot across every screen in America, turning him into a national symbol of violence and lawlessness before a single witness testified, before a single piece of evidence was examined, before justice had any chance to speak. But what they didn't know, what no one in that packed courtroom knew, was that Michael Turner didn't run from that accident on Highway 6. He ran toward the flames! He smashed through a car window with his bare hands, pulled a dying woman from an inferno, and saved her life while risking his own. That woman was alive, breathing, and sitting in that very courtroom, and the memory card hidden inside. Emily's teddy bear held the video proof that would expose the most devastating conspiracy anyone had ever witnessed. So, if you're ready to witness a story of unshakable courage, brutal injustice, and a truth so explosive it brought an entire corrupt system crashing down, then subscribe to Journeys of Redemption right now. Smash that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to believe that justice can still win. And tell me in the comments what city and state you're watching from. I want to know how far this message is reaching across America, because what's about to unfold will leave you absolutely paralyzed with emotion, and you won't want to miss a single second of how a 10-year-old girl with nothing but faith, a teddy bear, and the truth took on the most powerful people in the room and changed everything. Michael Turner had been driving for 18 hours straight that October night, his 18-wheeler rumbling down Highway 67 through the thick Texas fog that made visibility almost impossible. The road was empty, silent, except for the hum of his engine and the occasional crackle of a CB radio. When suddenly, out of nowhere, a pair of headlights swerved violently across the center line. Michael's heart jumped into his throat as he watched a black luxury sedan lose control, spinning wildly before flipping 3 times and crashing into the guardrail with a sickening crunch of metal. The car landed upside down, and within seconds, flames began licking up from the engine, spreading fast, turning the wreckage into a blazing inferno. Most people would have kept driving, called 911 from a safe distance, maybe slowed down to watch from afar. But Michael Turner wasn't most people. He slammed on his brakes, threw his truck into park, and without a second thought, grabbed the tire iron from behind his seat and ran straight toward the fire. The heat hit him like a wall, scorching his face and arms as he got closer, the smell of burning rubber and gasoline choking the air around him. Through the shattered windshield, he could see a figure slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious, blood trickling down their face. It was a woman, her body limp, her clothes starting to smoke from the heat. Michael didn't hesitate. He swung the tire iron with all his strength, smashing the driver's side window over and over until the glass finally gave way. Flames were crawling up the dashboard now, the car groaning and creaking like it was about to explode at any second. Michael reached inside, his hands burning as he grabbed the woman under her arms and pulled with everything he had. She was dead weight, her body unresponsive, but he refused to let go. He dragged her through the broken window, stumbling backward as the fire roared louder, hotter, angrier. Just as he pulled her clear of the wreckage, the car exploded in a massive fireball, the force of the blast knocking him to the ground. Michael lay there for a moment, gasping for air, his ears ringing, his hands blistered and bleeding. The woman was beside him, still unconscious, her face covered in soot and blood. He crawled over to her, checking for a pulse, and felt the faint, fragile beat of her heart. She was alive. Barely, but alive. Michael pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. His voice hoarse as he gave them the location and begged them to hurry. He stayed with her, kneeling in the dirt on the side of the highway, holding her hand, whispering words of comfort, even though he didn't know if she could hear him. "You're gonna be okay," he said, his voice breaking. "Help is coming! Just hold on." The flames behind them lit up the night sky like a funeral pyre, casting long shadows across the road. Michael didn't know who this woman was, didn't know her name or where she was going or why she'd been driving so recklessly. All he knew was that she was a human being, and she deserved to live. When the ambulance finally arrived, the paramedics rushed over, loading the woman onto a stretcher and hooking her up to oxygen. One of them, a young guy with kind eyes, looked at Michael and said, "You saved her life. Man, if you hadn't pulled her out, she'd be dead." Michael just nodded, too exhausted to respond. The police showed up next, asking him questions, taking his statement, checking his truck for damage. Michael told them everything. How he saw the car lose control, how he pulled the woman from the fire, how the car exploded right after. The officers seemed grateful, one of them even shaking his hand and calling him a hero. Michael didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired, shaken, and worried about the woman. He asked if she was going to be okay, and the paramedics said they'd do everything they could. As the ambulance drove away, sirens wailing into the night, Michael climbed back into his truck, his hands still trembling, and continued his route. He didn't think much of it after that. He'd done what anyone should do. He'd saved a life, and he went home to his daughter, Emily, grateful to be alive. But 3 days later, everything changed. Michael was at home, making breakfast for Emily, when he heard the pounding on the door. Before he could even reach the handle, it bursted open, and 6 police officers stormed inside, guns drawn, shouting at him to get on the ground. Emily screamed, dropping her cereal bowl as her father was thrown to the floor, his face pressed into the carpet, handcuffs snapping around his wrists. "Mikhail Turner, you're under arrest for the murder of Gregory Whitman," one of the officers barked. Michael's mind went blank. Murder? Gregory Whitman? He didn't even know who that was. "There's been a mistake," he said, his voice shaking. "I didn't kill anyone. I saved someone. I pulled a woman from a burning car." But the officers weren't listening. They dragged him out of the house, past his sobbing daughter, past the neighbors who had come out to watch, and shoved him into the back of a police car. Emily ran after them, screaming, "Daddy! Daddy! Come back!" But a female officer held her back, telling her everything would be okay. It wouldn't be okay. Nothing would ever be okay again. At the police station, Michael was thrown into an interrogation room, where 2 detectives sat across from him, their faces cold and unreadable. They told him that Gregory Whitman, a wealthy businessman from Dallas, had died in the car accident on Highway 6. They said Michael had been identified as a suspect. The witnesses claimed he'd been driving recklessly, that he'd caused the crash and fled the scene. Michael couldn't believe what he was hearing. "That's not true," he shouted, slamming his cuffed hands on the table. "I didn't cause the crash. I saved someone. There was a woman in that car. I pulled her out." "Where is she?" "Ask her. She'll tell you the truth." The detectives exchanged a glance, and one of them leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "There was no woman. Mr. Turner. Gregory Whitman was alone in that car, and you're going to prison for what you did." Michael felt the world tilt beneath him. No woman! That was impossible. He'd held her hand. He'd felt her pulse. He'd watched the paramedics take her away. But as he sat there, handcuffed and helpless, he realized something terrifying. Someone had erased her from the story. Someone had turned him into a murderer, and he had no way to prove his innocence. The media picked up the story within hours, and it spread like wildfire across the nation. Truck driver murders Dallas millionaire in road rage incident, the headline screamed. Michael's mugshot was plastered on every news channel, every website, every social media feed. Reporters camped outside his house, harassing his neighbors, digging into his past, painting him as a violent, dangerous man with a history of anger, issues none of which was true. Prosecutor Rachel Whitmore held a press conference, standing in front of a wall of cameras, her voice strong and confident as she promised to deliver justice for Gregory Whitman and his grieving family. She called Michael a coward, a killer, a man who thought he could get away with murder because he was just a nobody truck driver. The public ate it up. Comment sections exploded with hatred. People called for his execution, for life in prison, for him to rot in hell. And through it all, Michael sat in a jail cell, alone, terrified, and completely powerless to stop the nightmare that was consuming his life. Emily visited him as often as she was allowed, pressing her small hands against the glass partition, tears streaming down her face as she begged him to come home. "I know you didn't do it, Daddy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know you saved someone. I believe you." Michael tried to stay strong for her, tried to smile and tell her everything would be okay. But inside, he was falling apart. He'd been assigned a public defender, a tired, overworked man named David Chun, who barely had time to look at his case. David told him the evidence was overwhelming, that the prosecution had witnesses, forensic reports, and a narrative that made Michael look guilty beyond any reasonable doubt. "I'm sorry, Michael," David said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Unless we can find that woman you claim to have saved, we don't have a defense." But Michael didn't know her name. He didn't know where she was. He didn't even know if she was still alive. All he had was the memory of pulling her from the flames, and that wasn't enough to save him. The trial began 3 weeks later, and it was a media circus from the very first day. Cameras lined the courthouse steps, reporters shouted questions, and protesters held signs demanding justice for Gregory Whitman. Inside the courtroom, Prosecutor Rachel Whitmore was in her element, delivering her opening statement with the passion and precision of a seasoned performer. She painted a vivid picture of Michael Turner as a reckless, angry man who had caused the death of an innocent, successful businessman and then tried to cover it up with a ridiculous story about saving a woman who didn't exist. The jury hung on her every word, their faces grim and judgmental. Michael sat at the defense table, his hands folded, his head down, feeling the weight of their stares like knives in his back. David Chun did his best to defend him, but his opening statement was weak, unconvincing, and drowned out by the sheer force of Rachel's performance. By the end of the first day, Michael knew he was going to lose. The system had already decided he was guilty, and there was nothing he could do to change their minds. But what no one in that courtroom knew no one in the entire country knew was that Emily Turner had a secret. Hidden inside her worn teddy bear, tucked into a small tear in the fabric, was a memory card. On that memory card was a video recorded by the dash cam in her father's truck, showing everything that happened that night. Emily had found it days after her father's arrest, tucked away in a box of his belongings that the police had returned. She'd watched the video over and over, crying every time she saw her father risk his life to save that woman, saw the car explode, saw the truth that everyone was ignoring. She knew she had to show it to someone, but she was just a kid. Who would listen to her? Who would believe her? So she waited, clutching her teddy bear, praying for the right moment. And on the 5th day of the trial, as prosecutor Rachel Whitmore stood before the jury, confidently declaring her victory, Emily knew that moment had come. She stood up, walked down the aisle, and changed everything. The trial had become a national obsession, broadcast live on every major news network, dissected on talk shows, debated in coffee shops and living rooms across America. People who had never met Michael Turner felt entitled to judge him, to declare him guilty based on nothing more than Rachel Whitmore's carefully crafted narrative and the sensational headlines that painted him as a monster. The prosecution's case was built on a foundation of manipulation, huff, and strategic omissions that turned a hero into a villain overnight. Rachel Whitmore stood before the jury every single day, her voice dripping with righteous indignation. Her perfectly tailored suits and calculated gestures designed to project authority and moral superiority. She wasn't just prosecuting a case, she was performing for the cameras, building her political brand on the broken back of an innocent man. Every word she spoke was a calculated strike. Every piece of evidence she presented was carefully selected to support her version of events. And every witness she called was coached to paint Michael Turner as a dangerous, reckless criminal who deserved to rot in prison for the rest of his life. The first witness Rachel called was Officer Brandon Mills, a highway patrol officer who had arrived at the scene shortly after the ambulance. He testified that when he arrived, he found Michael Turner standing near his truck, looking nervous and agitated, his clothes covered in soot, and his hands burned. Rachel pounced on this detail, asking Officer Mills if Michael had seemed guilty, if he had tried to leave the scene, if he had acted like someone who had just committed a crime. Officer Mills, clearly uncomfortable with the line of questioning, admitted that Michael had seemed shaken up, but he also mentioned that Michael had told him about pulling a woman from the burning car. Rachel immediately cut him off, her voice sharp and dismissive. "Officer Mills, did you see any evidence of a second person at the scene?" she asked. Officer Mills hesitated, then shook his head. "No, ma'am. The only body recovered from the vehicle was Gregory Whitman." Rachel turned to the jury with a triumphant smile, as if that single answer had proven Michael's guilt beyond any doubt. But what she didn't mention, what she deliberately left out, was that Amanda Hayes had already been taken away in the ambulance before Officer Mills arrived, and her name had been mysteriously removed from all official reports. The second witness was Dr. Patricia Lawson, the medical examiner who had performed the autopsy on Gregory Whitman. She testified that Whitman had died from blunt force trauma and smoke inhalation, injuries consistent with a violent car crash. Rachel asked her if the injuries could have been caused by another vehicle forcing Whitman off the road. And Dr. Lawson, following the script she'd been given, said it was possible. Rachel then presented photographs of the crash scene, zooming in on tire marks that she claimed showed evidence of another vehicle being involved. She pointed at Michael, her finger trembling with manufactured emotion, and told the jury that those tire marks belonged to his truck, that he had run Gregory Whitman off the road in a fit of rage, and then tried to cover it up with a ridiculous story about being a hero. The jury stared at Michael with cold, judgmental eyes, and he felt his hopes slipping away with every passing second. David Chun, his public defender, tried to object, tried to point out that the tire marks could have come from any vehicle, but Judge Hayes overruled him, and Rachel continued her assault without mercy. The third witness was the one that nearly destroyed Michael completely. Her name was Jennifer Caldwell, a woman who claimed to have been driving on Highway 67 that night and witnessed the entire accident. She took the stand, wearing a conservative dress and minimal makeup, her voice soft and trembling as she told her story. She said she had seen Michael's truck swerving aggressively, tailgating Gregory Whitman's car, flashing his high beams and honking his horn like a maniac. She claimed she watched in horror as Michael forced Whitman off the road, causing the crash, and then she saw Michael get out of his truck, look at the burning car, and walk away without helping. The courtroom gasped. The jury leaned forward, hanging on her every word. Rachel Whitmore nodded sympathetically, as if Jennifer's testimony had confirmed everything she'd been saying all along. But Michael knew Jennifer Caldwell was lying. He had never seen her that night. There'd been no other cars on that stretch of highway. She was a plant, a paid witness, someone Rachel had found to seal his fate. David Chun tried to cross-examine her, tried to poke holes in her story, but Jennifer stuck to her script, and the damage was done. By the fourth day of the trial, the media had already convicted Michael in the court of public opinion. News anchors discussed his guilt as if it were a foregone conclusion. Legal analysts predicted he would get life in prison without parole. And social media exploded with hatred and calls for violence. People who had never met him, who knew nothing about his life or his character, felt entitled to wish death upon him, to celebrate his downfall, to treat his suffering as entertainment. Michael's face was everywhere, on billboards, on magazine covers, on memes that mocked him and dehumanized him. His daughter Emily couldn't go to school without being bullied, couldn't walk down the street without people pointing and whispering. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, spent every night crying into her pillow and praying for a miracle that seemed impossible. Michael's elderly mother, Margaret Turner, watched the trial from her nursing home, her heart breaking as she saw her son being destroyed by a system that was supposed to protect the innocent. She called Emily every night, her voice weak and trembling, telling her to stay strong, to have faith, to believe that the truth would come out. But even Margaret was starting to lose hope. Rachel Whitmore's closing argument was a masterpiece of manipulation and emotional theater. She stood before the jury, her voice rising and falling with practiced precision, painting a picture of Gregory Whitman as a loving father, a successful businessman, a pillar of the community whose life had been stolen by a violent, reckless truck driver who thought he was above the law. She talked about Whitman's wife, who sat in the front row weeping into a handkerchief, and his two teenage children, who stared at Michael with pure hatred in their eyes. Rachel told the jury that Michael Turner had shown no remorse, no accountability, no humanity. She said he had invented a ridiculous story about saving a woman who didn't exist, a desperate lie designed to make himself look like a hero when he was really a coward and a killer. She walked over to the defense table, stood directly in front of Michael, and pointed at him with a trembling finger. "This man," she said, her voice breaking with manufactured emotion, "took a father away from his children. He took a husband away from his wife. He took a life, and then he tried to lie his way out of it. Don't let him get away with it. Give Gregory Whitman the justice he deserves. Find Michael Turner guilty." The courtroom was silent when Rachel finished, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a death sentence. Michael sat with his head down, his hands folded on the table, feeling the eyes of the jury burning into him. David Chun stood to deliver his closing argument, but his voice was weak, his words unconvincing, his defense crumbling under the weight of Rachel's performance. He tried to remind the jury that Michael had no criminal record, that he was a hard-working father who had never hurt anyone, that the evidence against him was circumstantial at best, but it wasn't enough. The jury had already made up their minds. The media had already written the ending, and Michael Turner was going to prison for a crime he didn't commit. As David sat down, defeated and exhausted, Michael looked over at the gallery and saw Emily sitting there, clutching her teddy bear, tears streaming down her face. She mouthed the words, "I love you." Dadgie and Michael felt his heart shatter into a million pieces. He had failed her. He had failed himself, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. But what no one in that courtroom knew what? Rachel Whitmore, Judge Hayes, the jury, and the entire nation didn't know was that the truth was sitting in the gallery, hidden inside a worn teddy bear, waiting for its moment to explode. Emily had watched every second of the trial, had listened to every lie, had seen her father being destroyed by people who didn't care about justice, only about power and ambition. She had wanted to scream, to run up to the judge and show him the video, but she was terrified. She was just a 10-year-old girl. Who would listen to her? Who would believe her? But as she sat there, watching Rachel Whitmore bask in her victory, watching the jury prepared to deliberate, watching her father's life slip away, Emily felt something shift inside her. She thought about her mother, who had died when Emily was just 5 years old, and how her father had been both mother and father to her ever since. She thought about the nights he had stayed up with her when she was sick, the birthdays he had celebrated with homemade cakes and silly games, the way he had sacrificed everything to give her a good life, and she realized that if she didn't do something right now, she would lose him forever. So on the 5th day of the trial, as Rachel Whitmore stood before the jury delivering what she thought would be her final, triumphant speech, Emily Turner stood up. Her legs were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest, but she didn't stop. She walked down the center aisle, past the rows of spectators who turned to stare at her, past the journalists who scrambled to capture the moment, past the defense table where her father sat with his head in his hands. She walked all the way to the front of the courtroom, right up to Judge Jonathan Hayes' bench, and she looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. The bailiff moved to grab her, but Judge Hayes raised his hand, stopping him. The courtroom fell silent. Rachel Whitmore turned around, her face twisted in confusion and annoyance, and Emily, her voice small but fierce, spoke the words that would change everything. "Release my father and I'll tell you who he saved that night." The courtroom erupted in laughter, but Emily didn't flinch. She stood her ground, clutching her teddy bear, and waited for someone to listen. Judge Jonathan Hayes stared down at the little girl standing before him, and for the first time in 5 days, he felt a flicker of doubt. He had presided over hundreds of trials in his 30-year career, had heard every excuse, every lie, every desperate plea from defendants trying to escape justice. But there was something about Emily Turner that gave him pause. Her eyes weren't the eyes of a child making up stories. They were the eyes of someone who knew the truth, someone who had been carrying a terrible burden and was finally ready to set it down. Rachel Whitmore stepped forward, her voice dripping with condescension. "Your Honor, this is clearly a desperate attempt by the defense to disrupt these proceedings. The child is obviously coached, and this is nothing more than a distraction." But Judge Hayes didn't respond to Rachel. He kept his eyes on Emily, and he asked her a question that would change the course of history. "Young lady," he said, his voice calm but firm, "do you have proof of what you're saying?" Emily nodded, her hands trembling as she reached into her teddy bear, pulled out the memory card, and held it up for everyone to see. The courtroom fell silent. Rachel Whitmore's face went pale, and Michael Turner looked up, his eyes wide with shock and hope as his daughter prepared to save his life. The memory card was small, no bigger than a thumbnail, but it held the power to destroy lies and expose the truth. Judge Hayes ordered the bailiff to take the card and insert it into the courtroom's projection system. Rachel Whitmore objected frantically, arguing that the evidence hadn't been properly submitted, that it was inadmissible, that it was a violation of procedure. But Judge Hayes overruled her, his voice sharp and commanding. "I want to see what's on that card," he said. "And I want to see it now." The lights in the courtroom dimmed, and the large screen on the wall flickered to life. The video began to play, and the entire room held its breath. The footage was grainy, but clear, recorded by the dash cam in Michael Turner's truck. It showed the dark, foggy highway, the empty road stretching out ahead, and then, suddenly, the black luxury sedan swerving wildly across the center line. The car spun out of control, flipped 3 times, and crashed into the guardrail with a sickening crunch. Flames erupted from the engine, spreading fast, and then the camera captured Michael Turner jumping out of his truck, grabbing a tire iron, and running straight toward the fire. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Michael smashed the window, reached into the burning car, and pulled out a woman whose face was clearly visible on the screen. And that's when everything changed. The video continued to play on the massive courtroom screen, and every single person in that room was frozen, their eyes locked on the footage that was systematically destroying the prosecution's entire case. The camera captured Michael Turner pulling the unconscious woman from the burning wreckage, her body limp in his arms, her face covered in blood and soot, but unmistakably visible. He dragged her away from the car, stumbling backward, and just as he cleared the vehicle, the explosion ripped through the night, sending flames shooting into the sky. The force of the blast was so powerful that the dash cam shook, the image blurring for a moment before refocusing on Michael kneeling beside the woman, checking her pulse, pulling out his phone to call for help. The audio was faint, but audible. Michael's voice, hoarse and desperate, giving the 911 operator the location, begging them to send an ambulance immediately. "There's a woman here. She's barely breathing. Please hurry, he shouted into the phone. The video showed him staying with her, holding her hand, refusing to leave her side until the flashing lights of the ambulance appeared in the distance. And then the footage ended, the screen going black, leaving the courtroom in absolute, deafening silence. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The weight of what they had just witnessed pressed down on the room like a physical force. Rachel Whitmore stood frozen at the prosecutor's table, her face drained of all color, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The jury members stared at the blank screen, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock to horror as the implications of the video sank in. The journalists in the gallery frantically typed on their laptops and phones, already crafting headlines that would dominate the news cycle within minutes. And Michael Turner sat at the defense table, tears streaming down his face, his entire body shaking as he realized that his daughter is brave. Incredible! 10-year-old daughter had just saved his life. Emily stood in front of Judge Hayes' bench, still clutching her teddy bear, her small frame trembling, but her eyes fierce and unwavering. She had done it. She had shown them the truth. And now, everyone would have to face what they had tried so hard to bury. Judge Jonathan Hayes sat back in his chair, his hands gripping the armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, and his eyes were fixed on the blank screen as if he were seeing a ghost. Because, in a way, he was. The woman in that video, the woman Michael Turner had risked his life to save, was someone Judge Hayes knew very well. Someone he loved more than anything in the world. Someone whose name had been deliberately erased from every official report, every witness statement, every piece of evidence presented in this trial. The woman Michael Turner had pulled from that burning car was Amanda Hayes, his wife. Judge Hayes felt the room spinning around him, felt his heart pounding in his chest like a drum, felt the crushing weight of guilt and shame threatening to suffocate him. He had presided over this trial for 5 days, had listened to the prosecution paint Michael Turner as a murderer, had allowed the jury to be manipulated and misled. And the entire time, the man sitting in the defendant's chair was the reason his wife was still alive. The realization hit him like a freight train, and for the first time in his 30-year career, Judge Jonathan Hayes didn't know what to say. Rachel Whitmore finally found her voice, though it came out shrill and desperate, a far cry from the confident, commanding tone she had used throughout the trial. "Your Honor, this video is inadmissible evidence. It wasn't submitted through proper channels. It hasn't been authenticated. It could be doctored or manipulated." She was grasping at straws, her carefully constructed case crumbling around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. Judge Hayes turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was one of pure, cold fury. "Sit down, Ms. Whitmore," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Rachel opened her mouth to protest, but the look in his eyes silenced her immediately. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling, her mind racing, as she tried to figure out how to salvage her career from the disaster that was unfolding before her. But it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back in the box. The entire nation was watching, and they had just witnessed the most spectacular collapse of a prosecution case in modern legal history. Judge Hayes turned his attention to Emily, his expression softening as he looked down at the brave little girl who had just exposed a conspiracy that reached far beyond this courtroom. "Young lady," he said gently, "can you tell me where you got this video?" Emily's voice was small but steady as she answered, "It was in my daddy's truck, Your Honor. The police gave us back his things after they arrested him, and I found the memory card in a box. I watched it, and I knew it showed the truth. I knew my daddy didn't kill anyone. He saved someone. He's a hero." Her voice broke on the last word, and tears spilled down her cheeks. But she didn't look away from the judge. Judge Hayes felt his own eyes burning with tears, felt a lump in his throat threatening to choke him. He cleared his throat and asked the question that everyone in the courtroom was thinking. "Emily, do you know who the woman in the video is? The woman your father saved?" Emily shook her head. "No, sir. I just know she was in the car, and my daddy pulled her out before it exploded." She should be here. She should tell everyone what happened. Judge Hayes took a deep breath, his hands shaking as he gripped the edge of his bench. He knew what he had to do, knew that the next words out of his mouth would change everything, would expose his own failure and complicity in this miscarriage of justice. But he also knew that he owed Michael Turner the truth, owed his wife the truth, owed the entire country the truth. He stood up slowly, his voice heavy with emotion as he addressed the courtroom. "The woman in that video," he said, his voice breaking, "is my wife, Amanda Hayes." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Gasps and shouts filled the air. Journalists jumped to their feet. Cameras flashed, and the jury members stared at Judge Hayes in utter disbelief. Rachel Whitmore's face went from pale to ashen, her eyes wide with horror as the full scope of what she had done became clear. She had prosecuted an innocent man, had manipulated evidence, had erased a victim from the record, all to advance her political career. And now, the entire world knew. Judge Hayes continued, his voice shaking but determined. "My wife was in that car. She was driving home from a charity event in Dallas when she lost control of the vehicle. I was told she had been in an accident, that she had been taken to the hospital, but I was never told about Michael Turner. I was never told that he had saved her life, and I was never told that his name had been removed from the official reports." The implications of Judge Hayes' words hung in the air like a death sentence. Someone had deliberately covered up Amanda Hayes' involvement in the accident. Someone had erased her name from the reports, had manipulated the evidence, had turned a hero into a villain, and that someone had done it to protect powerful interests, to avoid scandal, to ensure that the narrative fit the prosecution's case. Judge Hayes turned to Rachel Whitmore, his eyes blazing with righteous anger. "Miss Whitmore, did you know about this? Did you know that there was a second victim in that car? Did you deliberately withhold this information from the court?" Rachel stood up, her legs shaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your Honor, I was given the case file by my office. I presented the evidence that was provided to me. I didn't know." But her words rang hollow, and everyone in the courtroom could see the lie written all over her face. She had known. She had to have known. And she had chosen to bury the truth because it didn't fit her narrative, because it would have destroyed her case, because it would have made Michael Turner a hero instead of a villain. Judge Hayes slammed his gavel down, the sound echoing through the courtroom like a gunshot. "This trial is over," he declared, his voice ringing with authority. "All charges against Michael Turner are hereby dismissed. Mr. Turner, you are free to go." The courtroom exploded in noise cheers, shouts, applause, and the frantic clicking of cameras capturing the moment. Michael Turner sat frozen in his chair, unable to process what had just happened, unable to believe that after 5 days of hell, after being vilified and humiliated and destroyed, he was finally free. David Chun grabbed his shoulder, shaking him gently, a huge smile on his face. "Michael, you're free. You're going home." Michael looked up, his vision blurred by tears, and saw Emily running toward him. The bailiff unlocked his handcuffs, and the moment they fell away, Michael stood up and caught his daughter in his arms, holding her so tightly he thought he might never let go. Emily sobbed into his chest, her small body shaking with relief and joy, and Michael whispered over and over, "Thank you, baby. You saved me. You saved me." But the drama wasn't over yet. Judge Hayes turned his attention to the back of the courtroom, where a woman sat in a wheelchair, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with tears. Amanda Hayes had been sitting there the entire time, hidden among the spectators, watching the trial unfold, watching her husband preside over a case that involved her own life. She had been told by powerful people to stay silent, to let the trial proceed, to not interfere with the legal process. But now, with the truth exposed, she could no longer stay hidden. Judge Hayes gestured to the bailiff, who wheeled Amanda forward to the front of the courtroom. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at her. This woman who had been erased from the story, this ghost who had suddenly become real. Amanda looked at Michael Turner, her eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow, and she spoke in a voice that was soft but clear. "Mr. Turner, I owe you my life. You pulled me from that fire when you could have driven away. You stayed with me, held my hand, called for help. You are the reason I'm still here, and I am so sorry for what they did to you." Michael stared at Amanda, his mind struggling to process the fact that this was the woman he had saved, the woman whose existence had been denied, the woman who had been used as a pawn in a corrupt systems game. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to the gratitude of someone who had been turned into a ghost, but Emily spoke for him, her voice small but fierce. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" she asked Amanda. "Why didn't you tell them my daddy saved you?" Amanda's face crumpled, and tears streamed down her cheeks. "I wanted to," she said, her voice breaking. "I tried to, but I was told to stay quiet. I was told that speaking out would cause problems, that it would complicate things, that it was better for everyone if I just stayed silent. I was scared. I was weak, and I am so sorry." Judge Hayes closed his eyes, his face a mask of pain and shame. He had failed his wife, had failed Michael Turner, had failed the very concept of justice that he had sworn to uphold. And now, the entire world was watching, as his failure was laid bare for all to see. Rachel Whitmore stood at the prosecutor's table, her career in ruins, her ambitions shattered, her carefully constructed image crumbling into dust. She had wanted to be a hero, had wanted to be the prosecutor who brought a killer to justice, had wanted to ride this case all the way to the governor's mansion, but instead, she had become the villain, the corrupt prosecutor who had manipulated evidence and destroyed an innocent man's life for her own gain. As the courtroom erupted in chaos around her, as journalists shouted questions and cameras flashed in her face, Rachel Whitmore realized that her life, as she knew it, was over. She would be investigated, disbarred, possibly even prosecuted herself. And she would forever be remembered, not as a champion of justice, but as the woman who tried to send a hero to prison. Judge Hayes looked out of the courtroom, at the chaos and the noise and the cameras, and he made a decision. He stood up, his voice cutting through the din like a knife. "This court is adjourned," he said, "and effective immediately. I am recusing myself from all future cases pending a full investigation into how this miscarriage of justice was allowed to happen. I have failed in my duty, and I will not compound that failure by continuing to sit on this bench." With those words, Judge Jonathan Hayes removed his robe, laid it on the bench, and walked out of the courtroom, leaving behind a legacy of shame and a system that had been exposed for the corrupt, broken machine it truly was. The news of Michael Turner's exoneration spread across America like wildfire, dominating every news channel, every social media platform, every conversation in homes, offices, and coffee shops from coast to coast. Within hours of Judge Hayes' dramatic announcement, the video from Emily's teddy bear had been uploaded to the internet, where it was viewed millions of times, shared endlessly, and analyzed frame by frame by people who couldn't believe what they were seeing. The same media outlets that had vilified Michael Turner, that had called him a murderer and a monster, were now scrambling to rewrite their narratives, to distance themselves from the prosecution's lies, to paint themselves as champions of justice who had always believed in his innocence. But the American people weren't fooled. They had watched the trial, had seen the media convict Michael before he ever had a chance to defend himself, and now they were demanding answers. How had this happened? Who was responsible? And how many other innocent people had been destroyed by a system that cared more about winning than about truth? The hashtag Justice for Michael trended worldwide, and Emily Turner became an overnight sensation, hailed as a hero, a symbol of courage and faith in the face of overwhelming injustice. Michael and Emily left the courthouse that day, surrounded by a crowd of supporters, people who had never met them but who felt compelled to show their solidarity, to cheer for them, to celebrate their victory over a corrupt system. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and microphones were thrust in Michael's face, but he didn't stop to answer any of them. He just held Emily's hand tightly, his other arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders, and walked through the chaos with his head held high. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe again, like the crushing weight that had been suffocating him had finally been lifted. But even as he walked toward freedom, Michael knew that the battle wasn't over. The people who had tried to destroy him were still out there, still powerful, still dangerous. And they would do everything in their power to cover their tracks, to shift the blame, to ensure that the truth didn't reach too far up the chain of command. Michael didn't care about revenge, didn't care about making anyone pay for what they had done to him. All he cared about was protecting his daughter and rebuilding the life that had been stolen from them. But the world had other plans. Within 24 hours of Michael's release, the FBI announced that it was launching a full investigation into the handling of his case, focusing specifically on how Amanda Hayes' name had been removed from the official accident reports and who had given the order to do so. The investigation quickly revealed a web of corruption that stretched far beyond Rachel Whitmore and involved powerful figures in law enforcement, the district attorney's office, and even the Texas state government. It turned out that Gregory Whitman, the man who had died in the crash, was not just a wealthy businessman. He was the son of Senator Richard Whitman, one of the most influential politicians in Texas, a man with deep connections to judges, prosecutors, and police chiefs across the state. When Gregory Whitman died in that crash, his father had used his power and influence to ensure that the narrative was controlled, that blame was assigned to someone expendable, and that his son's reputation remained untouched. Amanda Hayes' involvement in the accident had been erased because she was the wife of a judge, and her presence in the car raised uncomfortable questions about what she had been doing that night and why she had been driving so recklessly. The cover-up had been orchestrated at the highest levels, and Michael Turner had been chosen as the scapegoat because he was nobody, just a truck driver with no money, no connections, and no power to fight back. Rachel Whitmore, facing the collapse of her career and the very real possibility of criminal charges, held a press conference 3 days after the trial ended. She stood behind a podium, her face drawn and exhausted, her voice shaking as she read from a prepared statement. She claimed that she had been misled by the evidence provided to her, that she had acted in good faith based on the information she had been given, and that she was as shocked as anyone to learn about but her words rang hollow, and the reporters in the room tore into her with questions that exposed the cracks in her story. "Ms. Whitmore, did you know that Amanda Hayes was in the car?" one reporter shouted. "Did you deliberately withhold that information from the defense?" Rachel stammered, her face flushing red, and tried to deflect. "I presented the evidence that was in the case file. If there were omissions, that's not my fault." But the damage was done. Within a week, Rachel Whitmore was suspended from the district attorney's office pending an ethics investigation. And her political ambitions to governorship she had dreamed of, the power she had craved, were destroyed forever. She would eventually be disbarred and charged with prosecutorial misconduct, becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition unchecked by integrity. Judge Jonathan Hayes, meanwhile, had retreated from public life, consumed by guilt and shame over his role in the miscarriage of justice. He had resigned from the bench immediately after the trial, but that wasn't enough to ease his conscience. He knew that he had failed Michael Turner, had failed his wife, and had failed the very principles he had sworn to uphold. In a rare interview with a national news network, Judge Hayes spoke publicly about what had happened, his voice heavy with emotion as he admitted his mistakes. "I should have questioned the evidence more closely," he said, his eyes red and tired. "I should have demanded to know why there were inconsistencies in the reports. I should have protected the integrity of the trial, but I didn't. I allowed myself to be blind, and an innocent man nearly went to prison because of it." He paused, his voice breaking. "Michael Turner saved my wife's life, and I almost sent him to prison. I will carry that shame for the rest of my life." The interview was watched by millions, and while some people sympathized with Judge Hayes, others were less forgiving, arguing that his failure was inexcusable and that he should face criminal charges for his role in the cover-up. But no charges were ever filed, and Judge Hayes faded into obscurity, a broken man haunted by the ghosts of his failures. Amanda Hayes, for her part, became one of the most vocal advocates for Michael Turner and for criminal justice reform in the aftermath of the trial. She gave interviews, wrote op-eds, and testified before legislative committees, using her platform to shine a light on the corruption and abuse of power that had nearly destroyed an innocent man. She spoke openly about the pressure she had been under to stay silent, about the threats and intimidation she had faced from powerful people who wanted to control the narrative. "I was told that speaking out would ruin my husband's career, that it would cause a scandal, that it would be better for everyone if I just disappeared," she said in one interview. But staying silent almost cost Michael Turner his life, and I will never forgive myself for that. Amanda's advocacy helped push through new legislation in Texas requiring greater transparency in criminal cases and stricter penalties for prosecutors who withhold evidence. She also established a foundation to provide legal assistance to wrongfully accused individuals, naming it the Turner Foundation in honor of Michael and Emily. It was her way of trying to make amends, of turning the tragedy into something positive, of ensuring that what happened to Michael would never happen to anyone else. Michael Turner, meanwhile, struggled to adjust to his newfound fame and the overwhelming attention that came with it. He was offered book deals, movie rights, speaking engagements, and endorsement opportunities, but he turned most of them down. He didn't want to be a celebrity or a symbol, he just wanted to be a father, to give Emily the normal life she deserved, to put the nightmare behind them and move forward. But the trauma of what he had been through didn't just disappear. Michael had nightmares about the trial, about sitting in that courtroom, feeling the weight of the jury's judgment, about watching his daughter cry as he was dragged away in handcuffs. He struggled with anxiety and depression, and there were days when he couldn't get out of bed, couldn't face the world, couldn't shake the feeling that the system could come for him again at any moment. Emily noticed her father's pain, and she did everything she could to help him heal, reminding him every day that he was a hero, that he had done nothing wrong, that the truth had won in the end. Slowly, with Emily's love and support, Michael began to rebuild his life, finding work with a trucking company that was proud to employ him and reconnecting with old friends who had stood by him through the darkest days. The FBI's investigation into the cover-up eventually led to the indictment of several high-ranking officials, including 2 assistant district attorneys, a police captain, and a senior aide to Senator Richard Whitman. The senator himself was never charged, but the scandal destroyed his political career, and he announced his retirement from the Senate within 6 months of the trial's conclusion. The investigation revealed that the cover-up had been motivated by a desire to protect Gregory Whitman's reputation and to avoid embarrassing questions about why Amanda Hayes had been in the car with him that night. It turned out that Gregory and Amanda had been having an affair, a fact that both families had desperately wanted to keep hidden. Gregory had been driving drunk, had lost control of the car, and had caused the crash that nearly killed Amanda. Michael Turner had stumbled into the middle of a scandal involving powerful people, and they had tried to destroy him to keep their secret safe. The revelation of the affair added another layer of tragedy to the story, and it explained why Amanda had been so reluctant to come forward. She had been ashamed, terrified of the judgment and condemnation that would come if the truth were revealed. But in the end, the truth had come out anyway, and the people who had tried to bury it had paid the price. 1 year after the trial, Michael and Emily Turner were invited to the White House, where the President of the United States honored them in a special ceremony, recognizing their courage and resilience. The President praised Emily for her bravery, calling her a shining example of what it means to stand up for truth and justice, even when the whole world is against you. He praised Michael for his selflessness and heroism, for risking his life to save a stranger without expecting anything in return. The ceremony was broadcast live across the nation, and millions of people watched as the president presented Michael with a Medal of Valor and Emily with a special commendation for her role in exposing the corruption that had nearly destroyed her father. Michael stood on that stage, his arm around his daughter, and he felt a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in a long time. The nightmare was finally over. The truth had won, and he and Emily could finally move forward, knowing that justice had been served and that their story would inspire others to never give up, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. But perhaps the most powerful moment came not at the White House, but on a quiet evening several months later, when Michael and Emily were driving down Highway 67, the same stretch of road where the accident had happened. Michael pulled over at the spot where he had pulled Amanda Hayes from the burning car, and he and Emily got out of the truck and stood there in the fading light. Emily held her father's hand, and they stood in silence for a long moment, remembering everything that had happened, everything they had been through, everything they had survived. Michael looked down at his daughter, this incredible, brave, beautiful little girl who had saved his life, and he felt tears streaming down his face. "I'm so proud of you, Emily," he said, his voice breaking. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." Emily looked up at him and smiled, her eyes shining with love. "I learned it from you, Daddy," she said. "You taught me to never give up, to always fight for what's right, no matter what. You're my hero." Michael pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly as the sun set behind them, casting long shadows across the highway. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the Texas landscape, Michael Turner finally let go of the pain, the anger, and the fear that had haunted him for so long. He was free. He was home. And he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The story of Michael and Emily Turner became a defining moment in American legal history, a case study taught in law schools, a rallying cry for criminal justice reform, and a reminder that even in the darkest moments, truth and courage can prevail. Their story inspired countless people to speak out against injustice, to question authority, to demand accountability from those in power. And it proved that sometimes the most powerful voice in the room isn't the prosecutor with a fancy suit or the judge with a gavel. It's the voice of a child who refuses to let the truth be silenced. Emily Turner had walked into that courtroom with nothing but a teddy bear and a memory card, and she had brought an entire corrupt system to its knees. She had shown the world that justice isn't about power or money or connections. It's about truth, courage, and the willingness to stand up and fight, even when you're just a 10-year-old girl facing the most powerful people in the room. And that lesson, more than anything else, is what made their story unforgettable. The story of Michael and Emily Turner didn't just end with a courtroom victory. It became a movement, a symbol of hope for every person who has ever felt powerless against a system designed to crush the innocent and protect the guilty. Their journey reminded America that justice isn't guaranteed, that truth doesn't always speak louder than lies, and that sometimes the only thing standing between an innocent person and a lifetime in prison is the courage of someone who refuses to stay silent. Emily Turner, a 10-year-old girl with nothing but faith and a teddy bear, proved that you don't need power, money, or influence to change the world. Just need the courage to stand up and tell the truth, even when everyone around you is laughing, mocking, and telling you to sit down and be quiet. Michael Turner showed us that heroism isn't about seeking recognition or reward. It's about doing the right thing in the moment when it matters most, even if it costs you everything. Together, father and daughter reminded us that love, faith, and courage are more powerful than any corrupt system, any manipulative prosecutor, or any lie designed to destroy the innocent. This story should make every single one of us stop and ask ourselves, how many other Michael Turners are sitting in prison right now, convicted of crimes they didn't commit, destroyed by prosecutors who cared more about winning than about justice? How many families have been torn apart by a system that values power and ambition over truth and integrity? And how many children like Emily are out there right now, holding on to hope, clutching their own version of a teddy bear, praying for someone to listen, to believe them, to give their loved ones a chance? The Turner case exposed the cracks in a system that we're supposed to trust, and it challenged all of us to demand better, to hold our leaders accountable, to never accept injustice as inevitable. Because if a 10-year-old girl can take on the most powerful people in a courtroom and win, then we have no excuse for staying silent when we see corruption, abuse of power, or the destruction of innocent lives. Michael and Emily's story is a call to action, a reminder that change starts with ordinary people who refuse to accept the world as it is, and who fight to make it what it should be. So if this story moved you, if it made you angry, if it made you believe that justice can still win, then I need you to do something right now. Subscribe to Journeys of Redemption. Hit that like button. Share this video with everyone you know. And tell me in the comments what city and state you're watching from. I want to know how far this message is reaching and how many people are ready to stand up for truth and justice. And don't stop here. There's another powerful story waiting for you on the screen right now. Another journey of redemption. Another battle between truth and lies. Another reminder that courage can change everything. Click on it, watch it, and keep this movement going. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, for caring, and for believing that the truth still matters. Until the next video, keep fighting for what's right. Keep standing up for the innocent. And never forget that even the smallest voice can shake the foundations of the most powerful systems. See you soon.